hear some of the stories of those who worked on the Manhattan Project. In fact, one of the guys that sells me equipment was a Marine colonel that was over the task force to watch Oppenheimer during his work with the crew. And so he heard a lot of stories. And some of the concerns that they were talking about is, if we set this thing off, there's a chance we could light the whole atmosphere of the Earth on fire. George, that's a tremendous risk. That's a real downside for me.
Absolutely. Well, when they were developing, Brooks, as you know, the atomic bomb, some of them actually thought we were going to ignite the atmosphere.
So if you have a downside like that, even thought of by the very scientists that are developing the system for you, what kind of insanity would actually push the button and take the chance?
Well, we know that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
You had mentioned the name of Dr. Bernard Eastlund. Tell us a little bit more about him.
Well, a very innovative inventor and certainly a physicist. When I met him and I talked to him, he had a million ideas a second. He was commissioned by the United States Navy to come up with ideas for how to use a tremendous amount of natural gas, which the Navy had on their property on the North Slope of Alaska. This was his proposal, these 7 patents that were filed, and the Navy liked it because it had the aspects of weaponry. It had the aspects of clandestine communications with submarines so that they could direct what we call the Marconi effect, and I'll explain that in a second. And it also was something that was technologically achievable. And so when they built it, I don't really think they thought about the downsides. When I started doing the calculations and getting back with Dr. Eastlund about what we call the ionospheric breakdown, the solar tap, he was pretty scared about it too, and that's why he agreed to participate with Dr. Begich and myself and Gene Manning and Flanagan to produce this video called Holes in Heaven.
Was he the kind of guy, is he the kind of guy who would get upset if he knew technology was being used for the wrong purpose?
Yeah, he would. In fact, he had a gag order on him for a number of years after he produced the patents. Obviously, these things were put under NSA seal, and they weren't for public perusal. But once that gag order was lifted, and it was somewhere in the mid-'90s, I'm thinking 95, 96, 97, somewhere in there, then he was able to contribute to the documentary. And I didn't keep up with him too much after that, but I understand he didn't live too much longer after that.
Let's hope they didn't do him in.
Well, he wasn't a particularly old fellow, so I don't really know what happened.
Well, you don't know. Okay. Scientists are beginning to tell us now publicly that they manipulate weather. They've done it in the Middle East. They've done it in China. I'm sure they've done it here, Brooks. What do you hear?
Well, it's certainly possible. When the HAARP is fired off, one of its first qualities is an ionospheric heater. It heats up the ionosphere. It shoves energy into a section of the atmosphere around the Earth that doesn't normally get energy from the Earth. It usually gets it from the sun. That's why we get the auroras that we see over both poles. That's where it got its name, the Auroral Research Program, because when they fired this unit off, this phased array of antennas, and they got the power up sufficiently, it created an aurora when it hit the sky. It poured so much energy into the molecules that are well spaced apart up there in space, up in the upper atmosphere. They put off light because they couldn't get rid of the energy any other way. We see it as light. But those ions are constantly charged up. And the more energy you pump into the ionosphere, the more potential you have for an accident. So when you shove this ionosphere out into space, you create kind of a giant parabolic dish. The Marconi effect, which is named after the guy who discovered it, he bounced radio waves from the east coast of the United States to Paris over the ocean, which is, of course, well over the horizon. Sure. But it only worked some of the time because the ionosphere doesn't always cooperate. That's why when you're down in Amarillo, Texas, you can pick up the Chicago AM station some nights because the ionosphere is just right. It'll skip off the ionosphere, and you can pick it up down in Texas. Of course, it's a 75,000-watt blowtorch, too, but still, it gets down there. But if you can manipulate the ionosphere, push it where you want it to go, then you can bounce signals off and direct them where you want to go, i.e. to submarines that are out at sea. Nobody else can listen in because then the signals become kind of unidirectional and reliable and very low power and targeted. Well, if you can communicate with subs, then you can also communicate with other areas of the planet. And so more and more experiments hit the docket, and as they were pushing the ionosphere out on a regular basis and pushing these frequencies out, they realized they had side effects. And in 1991, when they really started playing with it heavily, they experimented with it as non-lethal weaponry. This is what they call it, where they push ELF into the battlefield, in other words, an area that you want to invade, and they do what they call attrit the soldiers, attrition.
Now, what is that?
They keep them up for 30 days, no sleep, nightmares, anxiety, diarrhea, nervousness, paranoia. They pump these frequencies into the minds of the soldiers that are about to be invaded. And after 30 days, they're as weak as kittens, and they just come walking out of the shelters and won't even fight.
Have we used this?
Yes, we have, and we use it in the battlefield today. We have portable models of it. We pull them up with trucks to an area that we want to invade or to go in and clean up. We turn the unit on, and a few hours later, the soldiers walk in and meet hardly any resistance.
It doesn't single out just soldiers, though, Brooks. I'm sure it hits citizens, too.
It sure does. But it is non-lethal weaponry, so they consider it not a violation of the Geneva Convention.
I do know they have sound apparatus, right, where they turn it on and they basically pierces their ears.
Yeah, the sonic weaponry is just super high, intense, high decibel weaponry. They use it on every cruise ship is mounted with sonic cannons to keep hijackers from boarding them from the sea. But these are subsonic. These you cannot hear. These are waves that do things to the neurological systems of the human body.
And they have no idea that it's been turned on, do they?
That's correct. They don't hear anything. They don't suspect anything. And they're getting better and better at it. And, of course, Dr. Begich is much more well-qualified to talk about those effects than I am. But I became not worried about the ELF frequencies so much, the earthquake tendencies, but more about the RF being pushed up into the ionosphere, because this is like a giant ground wire being thrown up into the sky. And for those of we could pick it up on the next segment.
Yeah, we'll do that. And I also want to talk about the Japanese earthquake, because some say HAART may have been turned on during that same time period. We'll be back.